Partners evolve sometimes at different speed, the evolution of consciousness, and some may not evolve for a while at all. So it's possible that suddenly the awakened consciousness comes into you, and your partner remains where he or she is, and you go into enormous presence and aliveness and newness, and you still see he or she is still no change. And then wait a little and see, it is quite possible that your state transmits itself if there's even the slightest degree of readiness in the other. The fact that you do not strengthen his or her mind anymore by opposing his or her mind, the vital thing, don't oppose the mind. Can express your viewpoint without opposition. Something may happen, an opening may happen, or it is possible that you may have to separate, and it may be that the other partner will leave you because it is no longer satisfying to live with you without the drama. The pain body, of course, many of you know about the pain body, and hopefully not only know about the pain body, but have direct knowledge, immediate knowledge of your own pain body. The pain body, of course, is the favorite place for the pain body, which is the old accumulated pain, which is an energetic, almost an entity that lives in you, that lives on emotional suffering. It loves its vibrational frequency. It thrives on close relationships. That's where it gets its food, most of its food. There isn't much you can do if your pain body needs food. It can't do much when you go to the supermarket and only see the cashier for half a minute or 1 minute. Even there it could happen. I've been standing here for 10 minutes and you've been talking to this customer instead of serving me. But the favorite place for pain bodies to renew themselves are families and intimate relationships. That's their place. And so you will know your partner has a pain body, which occasionally takes them over and makes them say and do things that one could say they're completely out of character. Well, yes, it's unconscious. It comes as a surprise when you start living with a person and you've experienced their pain body after perhaps 2 or 3 weeks for the first time. And that used to be the big surprise when people got married. Nowadays, often people live together for a while before they get married, so they already know that the other has a pain body. It's good. And you haven't committed yourself yet. You can still get out. But what a dreadful thing when you marry somebody, start living with that person, and 2 or 3 weeks after the honeymoon, a totally different person is suddenly there. A person who is in a deeply negative energy field, says hurtful things, misinterprets what you do. You say, who did I marry? And you think this must be the real person. Maybe I married, this was all a disguise. The real person is coming out now. That's, of course, not the case. It's not the real person, it's the pain body. And where's yours? Oh. Your partner's pain body wants yours, wants your emotional reaction. Pain body is an emotional aspect of ego. It's part of the egoic consciousness. Pain body needs to be recognized in yourself and the other as it arises. It's not usually there all the time. That would be dreadful. But it comes periodically. And then you go back to normal for a while, and then it comes back. And so you need to recognize it, be there as the space for it, be the presence in the other and in yourself. Perhaps the most destructive thing in relationships is the pain body that people carry around with them, that takes them over and makes them, even sometimes people who are already awakening, they still periodically get taken over by their pain body and completely lose consciousness, are then completely identified with that energy field. It uses their mind. It rises up when the pain body needs to renew itself, feed on somebody else's reaction. It moves into your mind, and every thought you think is the thought of the pain body. It completely, the emotional energy field takes possession of your mind, which is probably, if you're not conscious, is probably problematic enough as it is, even without the pain body. But then the pain body rises into your mind, and then if you observe it in your partner, because if it happens to you, you can't observe it anymore. The presence is lost, but you can observe it in another more easily. Every word they say to you is the pain body speaking through them, as if an entity, and in a way it is like that, had taken possession of them and is now using their mind and speaking through their mind. You need to know that so that you do not react as if that were who they are. So that is where a degree of compassion comes in, when you recognize that they are being possessed at that moment by this entity called pain body. That helps to know it. But this entity is very cunning and knows exactly how to get an emotional reaction from you. It will accuse you, blame you, mention. It knows your weakest points, and it will go in there and press all the right buttons until you finally go, oh, oh, and your own pain body has awakened, and you're in the grip of it, and you start shouting, and whatever form the pain body takes. Or you may be present enough, and so that you don't get taken over by your own pain body. But even being in the grip of the pain body, if you're awakening, if the new consciousness is arising, there is a good chance that at the back there is still an observing presence. And you are able to say to your partner, I think my pain body has just come up. I can feel it. There it is. And if your partner's pain body has not come up yet, then he or she can help you to stay present with it. You can address it, see, it happened just at this moment when you said that, or that happened, that, and now I can feel it. Okay, let's stay with it. You may also point out to your partner that the pain body has come up when you observe it, and if you're lucky, there's still enough awareness there to recognize it. But the pain body is very cunning. It may even be that your own pain body is coming up and you're accusing your partner that their pain body is there. Whoa, very cunning. And of course, the interesting thing is if somebody says to you, there's your pain body, if there's a reaction, then he or she was right. What do you mean, my pain body? If there is an open looking, say, that's my pain body? Okay, well, let me just feel into this. Then probably wasn't. My pain body? Well, that's strange. Didn't feel like a pain body, but maybe. Are there specific suggestions for cerebral helpers, physicians, therapists, etc., to help us become present and stop thinking, to listen better just prior to encounter, taking deep breaths prior to entering patient room perhaps? So what suggestions for cerebral helpers? I talked about that a little bit a couple of days ago. People who use a lot of knowledge in their work with others. So if you are a certain type of spiritual healer, then you would most probably not apply your conceptual mind in the healing situation. But if you are a physician, whatever, then you have to apply your knowledge to the healing situation acquired over many years. And so, just to remind you what I said a couple of days ago or 3 days ago, you need to be able to still use whatever modality you use, your knowledge, apply it, but see if you can also have the application of your knowledge interspersed with little spaces of aware presence. Sometimes that happens when you listen to whatever the patient is telling you. Sometimes it may happen when you look at the patient. Sometimes it may happen when you place attention on a particular symptom, and you might notice before you come to a conclusion about whatever the condition of this patient may be, there is a moment when you are looking at the patient or at the presenting symptoms, and there is a moment perhaps of 3 seconds when there's no thinking yet. Anybody to look at something, first, in the first moment of looking at something, you're not yet thinking. Most people miss that completely. They don't realize that for the first 2 or 3 seconds, when you're looking at a patient, let's call him patient, client, whatever, you're looking, and before the mind begins the application of its knowledge to the situation, there is a space of just aware looking. And that many people do that without knowing it at all. It's a natural thing to do. There's a moment of space, but if you're aware of that moment of space of looking, then it becomes a little deeper and longer. It goes. And that is, you become aware of what already you're doing naturally without knowing it. When you become aware of it, it actually deepens. And it might get a little bit longer. Instead of looking for 3 seconds, you might look for 5 seconds. Before the mind comes in and says, okay, this is what this person needs, now I need to do this, this, this. And this is interesting. Whenever you encounter a new situation, and let's take it beyond the therapeutic situation. Whenever you encounter a new person, comes into your field of vision, you're walking, you're going around a corner, a new vista opens up. Anything, somebody is knocking at your door, you open the door, and then you look who is standing there. And for the first 2 seconds, there's no thinking. You need to take it in first. You need to take in the sense perception. So naturally, in daily life, people have the tiniest moments when they're not thinking. And it's always something new arises in your field of consciousness. And in the first few moments, or in the first moment, There is not yet an interpretation of it. There's only an absorbing it. If you find you're particularly peaceful or at ease, then you find there are longer periods when you're out in nature. Then you spend longer periods, perhaps 5 seconds, looking at a tree before your mind says anything, and you go, oh, this is so nice. Be aware in your daily life of the first, whenever something new comes into your field of vision, there will be a moment when you're just aware of it. And usually the mind tries to come in as quickly as possible because it does not like, the egoic mind does not like to be in a state of not knowing what's going on. It needs to adopt some kind of position towards what you're seeing, what you're perceiving. So it, as quickly as possible, it wants to come in with some kind of judgment or interpretation. I need to know. If you become aware of these naturally arising moments of presence, that are very, very brief, then they will be there consciously. And if they're there consciously, they naturally become a little bit longer, and there's a deeper awareness. So catch those things in your daily life. They will be there. Every time something new arises, you need to look first. And there's that space before the mind steps in. And if you are a deep person, so to speak, then that space that precedes thinking is longer. That's all. Then you become a deeper human being. If that space is incredibly short, almost non-existent in some people, immediately, then they are superficial. They might have 2 PhDs, but they are superficial. There's no depth to them, which means, well, there is a depth, but it is as if it wasn't there because it's totally covered up. So a deep human being has longer spaces of no thinking before that person replies, or that person, now don't, this is a natural thing. You can make it into a practice, yes, too, as long as the ego doesn't get in there and say, oh, I want to appear, I want to be a deep person, so I'm going to take a long time in answering any question from now on. So in the therapeutic situation, also be aware of this. So bring in the spaces and observe the spaces that occur naturally in that situation. They will be brief. In addition to the spaces that occur naturally in the situation, bring in these spaces, for example, when listening to the patient, just listen. When you may also occasionally be aware of your breathing as you do. So any way you can, bring in little spaces, give fullest attention to whatever you're doing. You're preparing something, perhaps you're going to administer something to the patient. If you're a physician, you're preparing something. In that moment, there's another opportunity for absolute presence. So it's an art to have your knowledge not completely obliterating these little moments of spaciousness in you. It's an art that needs to be practiced. Otherwise, the effect that it has on you after many years of being completely absorbed only in your knowledge when you work with people, then you live in a world complete conceptualization, and you will no longer be able to see the human being. You will see a patient. You will not relate to a human being anymore. You will relate to a patient. or you will only relate to a symptom in a patient. And some doctors, unfortunately, have gone that way because nobody has taught them that another way is possible. So perhaps many of you have experienced being with certain doctors who actually don't see you as a human, they see you as a patient, or they're only interested in the symptom. Some doctors even hardly look at you. Of course, there's pressure of work, they have a few minutes to see you. But all those physicians and other cerebral, as the questioner says, practitioners, of course, obviously you are here because you have already gone beyond that to some extent. So you're not totally burdened by the acquired knowledge so that it obliterates everything else. Interspersed. So, but what applies to the therapeutic situation applies to anybody's daily life too. You must have your daily life interspersed with presence. Otherwise, it's just the human mind dragging you along. This mind-made sense of self is also much more focused on the negative than the positive. To be free, you awaken to who you are beyond your history and your life situation. But your happiness or fulfillment does not depend on any other human's acceptance of who you are. That would be a deluded thought. It sometimes happens that members of the same family evolve at very different rates, so that a sense of separation can come if one member of the family evolves spiritually much more rapidly than another, and that is something that you cannot do anything about. You need to accept that your sisters, their viewpoints and their judgments of you arise because of the way in which they have been conditioned by their culture. So this is part of the mental conditioning. There's nothing really personal about it. They have been conditioned in a certain way. To some extent, you have gone beyond your conditioning, because anybody who begins to awaken spiritually goes beyond, also simultaneously begins to go beyond their cultural conditioning. And that applies whether you're from Somalia, whether you're from Australia, or whether you're from the United States or anywhere. If you are not awakening spiritually, your behavior, your viewpoints, your opinions, the way in which you judge other people, the way in which you judge other cultures, all that is conditioned by the content of your mind, the culture and family and so on that you grew up in. So you are basically a conditioned entity. And your opinions and viewpoints are not really yours, they are the product of your conditioning. And so that's the case with your sisters. So sometimes the same thing applies to close friends. I've had many similar questions of people who had a close friendship with someone, and sometimes it's the case with husband and wife. Often I've had in many cases, one of them, either she or he, began to evolve and awaken spiritually. And a gap suddenly arose between the one that was still totally conditioned and the one that was beginning to awaken spiritually. In some cases, they can still live together. It depends on the nature and degree of the person who is not yet awakening spiritually. It depends that the ways in which this non-awakened state manifests differs from person to person. Some you can live with, you can awaken, and you know your partner is not, and you can totally surrender to that fact that your partner is not awakening yet. In other cases, it will create a hostility, a growing hostility in your partner. The ego objects to the other becoming so different and changing. They don't understand you anymore, and then a separation happens. With husband and wife, then it sometimes happens that they do that different ways. In the case of a family member, there's a link that remains, so you cannot just say we go our different ways. There's always a certain bond between you and your family members. But the first thing is, you ask me what I would do. What I would do is, first of all, understand why, and this is what I've just been talking about. If you understand, then already it is a helpful thing. If you don't understand why is this happening, but if you understand that these people act out of your sisters act out of their conditioning, you have begun, already are in the process of transcending your conditioning. Whether or not they will also awaken or begin to awaken spiritually, we don't know. So in the meantime, all you can do, or all I could, if I were you, all I could do was continue to recognize the limitation in them. It is, they are conditioned in their responses. Recognize that that is what happened, not to blame them for it, not to feel guilty because you make them angry, because you don't. It's their conditioning that makes them angry. So you don't feel guilty because you are different from them. I wouldn't. I'm talking now about I would not feel guilty. I would simply recognize compassionately what it is that makes them say and do the things they say and do towards you. And you cannot even explain to them. It would be futile to say to them, I know why you're saying that to me, because you're totally conditioned. What? They wouldn't know what you're talking about, because they know nothing outside of their conditioning. So compassion arises, compassion and acceptance of a person's limitations. You can still hold them in your heart and realize there is an essence in them that is lovable, and you can continue to be connected to that essence of who they are. If they refuse to talk to you, then you have to accept and surrender that. You can hold them in your meditation. You can even sometimes look at their photo, look beyond the surface appearance of who they are, and the photo can be a little help to establish the inner connection. Then you don't need the photo anymore. To establish the inner connection, feel the inner connection with their innermost selves, and even if they don't talk to you, that can still be there. And then you send, in the conventional New Age language, you send loving energy to them. There's some truth in that. So there's a loving, still a loving connection, even though you don't talk. So recognition, to summarize, recognition of why this is happening, accepting your family members' limitations, and not judging them. They judge you, of course, because their judgments of you are part of their conditioning. But you don't need to judge them. You simply see that this is a limitation of their state of consciousness at this present time. They will awaken too in time, eventually, this lifetime or the next. So then you can begin to feel peaceful about it, so that it does not become a source of suffering, continuous source of suffering at the back of your mind. So if you can be in a loving relationship, even though you might not meet them much anymore or at all, you can stay in a state of love towards them, compassionately accept their limitations, and then see what happens. Sometimes in that way a healing does happen. It may be that at some point there's a crack in their conditioning and they're suddenly able to accept you, who you are for who you are now. But your happiness or fulfillment does not depend on any other human's acceptance of who you are. That would be a deluded thought. If you think you can only be happy if these people accept and understand you. Some people have that with their parents. So they say, my dad, my father, they don't understand me at all. It's terrible, terrible. I'm trying to explain what I'm at. Of course, they cannot understand you. It's beyond their comprehension if you have awakened spiritually and they haven't. So compassionately accept that they cannot understand you. Instead of trying to explain yourself to them, just be there in a loving way with them when you meet for Christmas or Thanksgiving and you hear all the judgments coming at you from them. You should have, why don't you? Look where it's taken you. Look at your sister, she married a millionaire and you and you are into that weird kind of meditation stuff that's not getting you anywhere. Whatever judgments come, say, okay, I know that this is what you think and feel, and I think and feel differently, that's all. So you don't need to justify or accepting people's limitations and suddenly realizing whether or not your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, or anybody else close to you accepts you for who you are is really not. You become free of the need to be accepted, but you can nevertheless have a deeper connection, keep that deeper connection and connectedness with them. But it started when I was writing A New Earth, and then I couldn't focus on anything else while I was writing, and then things started to accumulate. And now I still get all these manuscripts and books sent, and some of them are taking up more and more space at my place, so let's not go there. Well, the anxiety about not taking care of the future is, of course, losing the present moment. That's the real loss of the present moment. But taking care of the future by doing some planning, constructive planning, even constructive thinking, not useless thinking and worrying and toxic thinking in the middle of the night, things what I should be doing or haven't done, or if I do it, it might go wrong. Not that kind of totally useless thinking, which is losing the present moment. Mm-hmm. Then there is the applied thinking, which is, I need to work out what I'm going to do, whatever, a schedule for the next thing I'm going to do, a plan for next year when I will have to do this or that, whatever. And you may find that if you do focused thinking and apply it to whatever it is that you need to work out, is not losing the present moment. It's only useless thinking about the present moment that mentally projects you away from the now and doesn't get you anywhere, detracts from the quality of life, and detracts from your sense of aliveness. So planning you can do in the present moment. Let's say I plan, where am I going to go? I'm going on a tour somewhere. I was on a Europe tour late last year, and that had to be planned almost a year in advance. So already at the beginning of last year and before then, we were already talking about the Europe tour. And so what then, you look at the calendar, cities, geography of places where they connect, all the other factors that you need to look at. You're not really losing the present moment because you're not projecting yourself mentally over there and imagining how it's going to go, or imagining that when you finally give that talk in London, then you're really going to feel really fulfilled, or projecting yourself to that talk in London when no one is going to like what you're going to say, and half the audience are going to leave. Am I going to be inspired when I reach London and to give a talk? It's just losing the present. And this kind of thinking happens. It pretends to be useful and constructive, but it's not at all. And it's not taking responsibility for anything. But applied thinking, and for applied thinking, it's good to give yourself a time limit, a space. You sit down for an hour, or you talk to people and say, what do we need to do here in order to do this, that. You're not losing the present moment. Some people often, this is not uncommon for people to have this question, thinking that I must never think about the future. But when you apply that, you're not really thinking about the future. The planning is now. You're not projecting yourself away from the present moment. So it's applied and constructive thinking. The same with the past. Sometimes you need to think about something that happened in the past. You need your memory for certain things, and then you need to you go back there in your mind, and then you talk about, but there's a reason why you bring it into the present, because you need that kind of memory or the knowledge. Perhaps you learned something there at the past Europe tour. Those things went very wrong. The people had to line up for an hour, and I was an hour late starting. It was disorganized. What did we do wrong? That's fine. You have to go there. Mm-hmm. But if you, in the middle of the day, you think how dreadful that was, or you're blaming yourself or others about what went wrong, then you lose yourself in the past. Mm-hmm. So you can use past and future without losing yourself in them, and then really you remain present even while you refer back to the past or while you make plans for the future. So that's really how it works.
Is there a way that you can, if you're happy, you can trust the universe that you're on the right path?
Oh, yes.
Is that just... Okay.
That is an underlying thing, is, of course, the sense of connectedness with the deeper level, the deeper levels of your being, the awareness, the presence, the stillness, whatever you want to call it. And that gives you a certain rootedness. You're rooted in being. And then what happens on the outcome of things that you do is no longer the factor that determines your state of consciousness. So when things go wrong, sometimes they do, you're not devastated. You don't feel you're going to die because it went wrong. And you didn't get there. You tried so hard, and in the end it didn't work out. And it's so awful. You beat yourself up mentally. No, that's very dysfunctional and creates a lot of suffering. Mm-hmm. So you are less dependent on you welcome a good outcome, of course, but you're not dependent on a good outcome for feeling peaceful and really complete in yourself. And that sense of completeness in yourself, because there are two levels, as you know, that one could say, the two dimensions. You are the person, but you are also the vast consciousness. So there's the ripple, there's the ocean. The person lives in time, and there's a development. The person learns things, gets better at certain things, and so on. At the deepest level, there is already that sense of completion. You don't need to become anything. When you are connected with the depths of who you are, in that depths, you don't need to become, you are already complete. On the level of the person, you're never really complete. And there are always things that could be called imperfections. Not once when you're connected, not huge things that create a lot of dysfunction in your life and make your life and other people's lives unhappy. Not that kind of thing. But there are things that are certain personal things that are limitations on. You can't be. My place at the moment is untidy. I'm not perfect there. So there was a time when my place was tidy, so I'm not an untidy person continuously, but it started when I was writing A New Earth, and then I couldn't focus on anything else while I was writing, and then things started to accumulate. And now I still get all these manuscripts and books sent, and some of them are taking up more and more space at my place, so let's not go there. But that's an imperfection on my part. If somebody had an idea of somebody who's fully awake, he must live in a certain way, and then he comes and says, how can you, this is not tidy, how do you live? Occasionally I have a cup of coffee, one a day, and occasionally people see me having a cup of coffee somewhere and say, why do you need coffee? You've written all these spiritual books and now you still need coffee? I don't know if I need it, I just enjoy a cup of coffee. And I drink a glass of wine or two, occasionally with dinner. You drink alcohol? Well, if my state of consciousness is so fragile that a glass of wine would upset it, then it can't be worth very much. So the addictiveness does not come in, because the addictiveness would be something else. If I were addicted to coffee and couldn't live without 6 cups of coffee a day, or if I were addicted to alcohol and wouldn't know when to stop drinking, that would be something else. But you can enjoy things. People might interpret it as an imperfection, and perhaps it is, but allow yourself to have your imperfections as long as they don't create suffering for others or yourself. Become comfortable with things where you are not perfect. Some people are habitually, it's not a nice thing, it's not my problem, but they're habitually late. Some people just have that. It's almost in their genes. I had a Filipino friend, I recently met her again after many years in London at university in Cambridge, and it must be in the Filipino genes to be late all the time. And apparently when I talked to her, she said, yes, everybody's late. Nobody expects people to be on time. And that maybe, she may not be able to get rid of that, because it's in her genes it says be late, or you don't need to be on time, and that's fine. That's how they live. It's not a problem in the Philippines. It might become a problem in the West, but not to them, to other people who might say there's something wrong with you. No, if some things can change, and that's good, and as consciousness awakens in you more, the awareness arises, it does tend to dissolve those patterns, as I said, that really F up your life.
Okay, thank you.
Because if you try and try and try to get enlightened, and then you get so frustrated, it's not happening, so you join the suffering group, and then you're much more likely to find it. Now, here's an interesting little paragraph on the Bhagavad Gita. What kind of people become spiritual seekers? And it divides into, there are four types of persons, according to here, and this still applies very much nowadays, and this was 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. There are four different types of persons who seek spirituality or God. So Krishna talks again as the personification of the One. Four types of people seek a connection with me. One, the world-weary, people who worship God for the alleviation of physical or mental agony, or to be released from fears and adversity. There's many people, of course, who come to a spiritual teacher or teaching or a spiritual book, come for that reason, and it is a good reason to want to be free of suffering. And of course, the whole Buddha's teaching is about freedom from suffering, so that's one type. Two, are the seekers of happiness. They are seeking happiness through worldly things. People who pray to God to obtain wealth, family, power, prestige, and so forth. So maybe those are people also who do go into manifesting things through positive thinking and affirmations, but connecting with a somewhat deeper level, yes, in a limited way still, yes. So they're seeking spirituality because they want something in this world. It still applies. Not that much has changed, apparently. And then there are the seekers of, this number 3 now, the third group, are the seekers of spiritual advancement. People whose motive for connecting with the divinity is to gain knowledge and experience, to aid their self-realization. And I would add, people also who want to have the high of what they conceive of as the high that surely enlightenment must be, as I sometimes call it. They want the fireworks, they're waiting for some ultimate experience. So that's another group, many like that. And of course, I'll talk about that in a minute. Number 4, these are relatively rare according to the Bhagavad Gita, are people who want to know God, who truly want to know the Atma, the Self, who know that God alone exists, and whose only impulse is for the divine and nothing else. And those are relatively rare. I just want God. So the ones, numbers, whose motive for connecting with divinity is to gain knowledge and experience, to aid their self-realization. So we have wanting to be free of suffering, wanting to be happy through this, that, or the other. 3, wanting knowledge or experience or some high. And 4, the direct, wanting the one. I just want that. So it's, of course, Bhagavad Gita says, of these 4, the last is the highest because they know my truth and are devoted to me. As I'm supremely dear to them, they are very dear to me. The first 3 are attached to the worldly objects or mental states they desire. But certainly all 4 types are noble, because any reason for turning Godward or inwards will in due time lead to spiritual transformation and is therefore ultimately good. So my comment on this is it is true that the ones who just want God are rare, and that's fine, it's not needed. Wanting to be free of suffering is more helpful. Those who want to be free of suffering or adversity, who've had enough suffering, that is a very powerful motivation for seeking spiritual awakening. It's a more powerful motivation and more likely to lead to realization or awakening than those who are seeking either happiness, because they will have to experience that none of the things they seek, even when they get them, is really going to fulfill that purpose of making them happy and fulfilled. And then they begin to suffer, and so they join group one. So first you're in that group for quite a while, and then when you realize, okay, my manifestation is great, it works, but still it's not quite right, because nothing fulfills me. Then you go back to group one, you're suffering. And if you're seeking, now many spiritual seekers seek some kind of enlightenment experience or awakening, and sometimes they write in and say, I've been trying so hard for so many years and it's not happening yet. I want to be free, I want to be enlightened, or whatever they call it. And they are expecting some kind of experience, or they believe that if they acquire enough knowledge about it, finally it's going to work. And so they become very knowledgeable. They can quote all kinds of scriptures. It's all there. And they know more and more about it, and more. And for those people, it's quite hard. In fact, unless they join another group, they're not going to make it. But they will have to join another group, which again is group number one, suffering. Because if you try and try to get enlightened, and then you get so frustrated, it's not happening, so you join the suffering group, and then you're much more likely to find it. So I'm really very fond of group one, suffering. As long as you're not identified with yourself as the suffering entity. When that becomes your identity, then you have another problem. But nothing that cannot be addressed and recognized in yourself. You and Krishnamurti both talk about the importance of choiceless awareness, directly confronting what is without judgment. You also talk about the primacy of presence as the way to transcend thought, the improper use of which is the cause of our suffering. Another teaching, respected by many, celebrates thought and desire as being responsible for our evolution and the expansion of the universe. While both teachings have much in common, this appears to be an important point of departure that I cannot reconcile. Can you help clarify? Is that the same Jeff who asked the previous question? Anyway, doesn't matter. It's only one consciousness, so. So there seems to be basically two teachings, he says, and many people have asked similar question. One is accept what is, choiceless awareness, presence. The other one is using thought to create, to manifest. to transform. Are they separate? Can they be reconciled? As I mentioned the other day, the two represent the two movements of the universe. One is into creation, multiplicity, increasing complexity of life forms. It experiences itself as that. It loves to create, that's for sure, because if you look around, even on this planet alone, how many life forms there are, all perceiving the universe in a different way, or saying the universe, the one consciousness, perceiving itself through all these different forms in different ways. You could call it a dream, you could call it reality, it doesn't matter. These are just words. And then the universe also wants to know its own source, and that's the return movement. First there's the outward movement, and then there's the return movement. This might correspond to the Big Bang, what scientists call, which the universe came out of nothing. Nobody knows what that is. It started from nothing, and suddenly it expanded and went into creativity, and life forms began to multiply over billions of years. And then the story goes, some scientists say, and even in ancient Hindu mythology and others, there's a story that eventually it will come together again and return to the one. In that case, it would be like the in-breath and the out-breath of God, the entire universe. God breathes out, and then it all returns back to the source for some reason that we could not even fathom. And even if we even to start thinking about it, what might the reason be, we would never find it through the conceptual mind. But that seems to correspond to what we do, because we have a heart that also goes, and we also breathe in and breathe out. And we also wake up in the morning and do all our activities, and at night time we go, and then we go, oh. Now everything is reflected on every level. You are a microcosm of the entire universe. So if you observe yourself, you observe how the heart works, how the breathing operates, how the sleep and wakefulness, dreamless sleep, dream state, the so-called wakeful state, which is not that wakeful for most people. But here we have similar, there may be, that certainly is a similar pattern everywhere. So I'm talking about this because this is how the two movements are reconciled. The universe needs both. It needs the creativity, it needs also the stillness. And for humans, it's not enough to go unconsciously to the source. It's our destiny, because it's the destiny of the universe to consciously unite with source consciousness. And that's why we are here. So your life needs to be a balance, a dance between creating and not getting lost in your creations. What is the motivation for creation if you're already accepting of the present moment, if you feel completely at one with the isness of the present moment? There are two reasons why you take action here. One may be as a response to a situation that requires action. So certain situations, somebody may need help. You can sit at ease, contemplating nature, and suddenly there's a human being who says, "Oh, help me." Do you sit there and say, "No, I'm too at ease in the present moment"? So a situation, you respond to whatever the situation, the present moment requires you to do. You respond from within. I was in the lucky position when I was a teenager. I lived with my dad in Spain for a few years, and he had gone to Spain to drop out and lead an alternative life, and then he ran out of money. And then when I was there, we had so little money, we had not even a fridge. I mean, almost everybody had a fridge. But there in the hot summer in Spain, no fridge, no radio, no television, of course, I couldn't even think of it. So basically just the minimum, and I wasn't dreadfully unhappy because of that. To some extent, I accepted it because I was still young enough. Children find it perhaps easier to accept situations that they go into. But normally, if I lived in a place like that now, I have no fridge, I have only basic things to live with. I can't buy anything in advance. I have to go shopping every day because everything goes off immediately. I'd rather move than be here. You can accept that this is where I am right now. It can still be fine, but you would start looking. I'd like to live somewhere else. You see, this situation has it can have a preference. And why not have everybody has a preference. Some Buddhists might talk to you about, or some masters say, I have no preference whatsoever. But they live in an ashram, so they'd rather be in an ashram than be on Wall Street and work there, so there must be some preference. So this is one thing, is dealing with, responding to situations and having preferences and then taking action. Another one is bringing about something entirely new into this world. And that comes when you are able to become still enough so that you know what the universe or the one consciousness wants you to do, if it wants you to do something. It may take a while before you know that. I lived for years doing relatively little, except doing occasional counseling sessions, sometimes only 2 a week. And the years passed, and I was just continuously, just in presence, on my bicycle, chopping wood, carrying water. And the years passed, and I spent hours in thoughtless awareness in London, sitting on Hampstead Heath. 3 hours later I go home, having a little salad, and then having a counseling session at 5, could live on one person a day, one counseling session a day. And my mind wondered sometimes, there must be something else that I'm supposed to do. And there was even slight moments of, what am I doing here? But there was nothing else to do than be present, go back to Hampstead Heath, sit there again. But there were long periods also of incredibly blissful states that people noticed, even people who were not tuned into spirituality particularly, say, I can feel something, what is that? There were great states, the emanation of peace, but I wasn't doing anything. There was just that emanation. Sometimes waiters or waitresses, occasionally I went to little restaurants, they felt something. But still, nothing. The universe still wasn't telling me what I was supposed to do. And I believe the decisive change came, perhaps I should have thought of that earlier. There was I had moved out of London to Somerset and lived in Glastonbury, the spiritual mecca that attracts all kinds of weird people, including myself. And just outside there's a village just a few miles out of Glastonbury. I would sometimes go there, and there's an ancient, like the English villages, they have their ancient church, sometimes 1,000 years old, a few houses around it. There was an oak tree. I would go to an ancient oak tree in the middle of the field, magnificent, and I had a wonderful relationship with that tree. But that church that was always empty, I went into that church, and one day I went in, and suddenly I had this impulse to say, I want acceleration now. I knew there was something for me to do, but I clearly demanded acceleration of my life purpose. And then I went home again, and for maybe 3 months, 2 or 3 months, nothing happened. I'd forgotten about it already. And then one day it came. It came when I woke up, and I knew, as a thought and a deeper knowing, I have to move to the west coast of North America. Why? I don't know. It wasn't just one day it stayed. The next day it was still there. The next week it was still there. The week was still there. And then finally I had to leave. Couldn't not leave. If I had not left, I would have died. So that was the first step in writing The Power of Now, because I needed to be in the energy field of the West Coast for some reason to write it. And that's how the book started. When a few weeks after arriving on the West Coast, it started. And then the acceleration, it came more and more. But after The Power of Now came out more, and then it became so much that I almost wanted to put the brake on. But it was the power just grew and grew. But it came because for years I went so deep within that eventually the outer movement into creation, the outward creation, reflected the depths of years of going within into stillness and deep into stillness. So the outward creation reflected the inward movement. It was as powerful out there as it was the power that was in the inward movement. So you too will find that the more you align yourself with the essence, the stillness within, the unconditioned consciousness, the more the power will, there might be a time gap, but hopefully not as many years as in my case. There may be a time gap, but that the power that is within you, that you sense when you become aware of yourself as the consciousness, then flows through you. And that is what creates through you, not the little ego anymore. So you don't create because you think, when I achieve this or that, I'm going to be happy and fulfilled. No, the happiness and happiness, something deeper than happiness, the fulfillment is already here now. The true creation cannot come out of a neediness. That's egoic creation. It doesn't make you happy, it'll make you unhappy. Whatever you create eventually either will not satisfy you or make you unhappy. That comes out of a neediness. The egoic creation believes I need to attract something to me. I need to attract this, I need to attract that into my life. The non-egoic creation that consciousness uses you as an instrument, uses this form as an instrument, comes out of the inner fullness. So the creation comes from within to without. It creates the outward from within, rather than needing to attract something from the outside. Although in language you might sometimes express it that way. You might say, I attracted this or that person into my life, but really it's the other way around. You can only create out of this fullness that you sense when you're in touch with presence. So if you discover within yourself that a lot of the time you're in a state of lack, of insufficiency, of not enough, and you feel that the answer to, the remedy is to be active in this world and achieve and do as much as possible, then you'll probably find that ultimately that is not the answer to your state of lack. In order to transcend, to go beyond your state of lack, of neediness, of not enough, spiritual practice and spiritual realization is necessary. Focus on the realization of being. It's only there that you can go beyond that state of lack, which is ego. Go within and discover who or what you are beyond the person. Something you can practice here and for the rest of your life is to perceive things, look and listen, sometimes even smell or touch or taste, without any mental label. This is an ideal environment to do it in nature, but you can do it anywhere, and it's not even a doing, we call it doing. Just you look at something, or even not just looking around. So either a specific thing, or you take in the totality of what's there, either in the room or out in nature, the sky, the trees, or you look at one thing and you're still while you look. And that's very important practice. And then you listen. Various sounds arise most of the time, and then always two things are there. There's that which arises in your sense perception, listening, seeing. And there is the space of consciousness in which it arises. You can also call it the light of consciousness in which it is perceived, without which there would be no perception. And whenever you do that, you are not a person in that moment. You are not a person. You are what comes to the forefront is the transcendent dimension to who you are, the consciousness. And so you can sense yourself as the consciousness, which is the space for whatever is being perceived. And there's one can almost a kind of joy in that, an aliveness, a beingness. You can sense your own identity beyond who you are, beyond the person, by just perceiving something and then at the same time sensing your own presence, which isn't your own, but which call it your own, the presence. And that is a passive thing, it seems, seemingly. It's taking in what's there. The next step is to practice being in that transcendent state of consciousness while things are going on around you. More challenging, being in that state while you're engaged in some activity. Start with simple activities. And again, the background is the presence. And you're doing whatever it is you need to do. For certain activities, of course, you need to think. And the thinker will start up. That's fine. When you speak, there's thinking. But you can, while you speak, you can still be connected to the transcendent. Then you don't speak from the level of the personality, then you speak from the more intelligent level of consciousness, the unconditioned consciousness. Very different kind of speaking. When you speak from the personality, whatever you say is colored and determined by the conditioning of your mind as the person. There's another way of speaking, even if it's a simple conversation. You're speaking from a truer, deeper level of who you are. And those words have a certain quality. You might not be saying necessarily anything significant, but those words have a certain aliveness and quality that is different from what comes from the personality level. So at any given time, there's the two dimensions to who you are, one could say. For the time being, let's put it like that. There's the personal level, and there's the transcendent you. And usually the transcendent in your normal daily life will be in the background. If you can sense that in the background, then you can deal with the stuff you need to deal with in the foreground of your life. Do this and this and this. Even thinking is in the foreground of your life. I have to think about this. And yet, at the same time, you sense yourself as the presence. So that's the depth within you. There's a stillness. There can be a stillness even while you're speaking. There's a stillness in the background. And when you've come to the end of a sentence, you might notice, there's a gap, and you're not thinking between the end of one sentence and the beginning of a new sentence. And so more and more the transcendent self emerges more into your life, comes in more. And the conditioned self does not disappear completely, but the conditioned self becomes less dense. The density of the personality, that many people are in the grip of that. There's a heaviness to it. I can sometimes see how people carry this burden of a personality without not the slightest glimpse of anything beyond, and it's a terrible burden to carry. The only sense of self they have is that conditioned sense of self, and there's a heaviness to it and a density. And as the transcendent emerges more, the personality level becomes more lighter and more, one could say, transparent. almost. So the light shines through more. The analogy you could use is a lampshade. When there's only the personality, the lampshade is so heavy, there's only a little bit of light shining through, but the layers of the lampshade are so thick that only very little comes through, and whatever comes through is totally formed by the lampshade. And then the shade gets a bit more transparent, and there's more light coming through. The same person is still there, the same lampshade, but there's a transparency to something deeper. And that's the only way you become more authentic, you become more truly yourself, the deeper, unconditioned self, which the Buddha calls the no-self. And if in spiritual terminology you could call Buddha nature is arising, Christ consciousness is arising, whatever you want to call it. So you cannot love your neighbor as yourself, as somebody once said. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. But he didn't give that as a commandment because he would have known that that's impossible for the personality. They missed a little bit when they wrote down what he was saying. He said, but the kingdom of heaven bit goes together with the loving your neighbor as yourself. So when you find that dimension within yourself, that is the kingdom of heaven, which in modern terms I would translate as the dimension of kingdom is dimension. Heaven is, in many languages, it's the same word as sky. In French, in Spanish, in German. Heaven and sky are the same word. So Jesus uses this thing, the sky, the vast expanse of the sky, as the closest word he can get to describing the inner space, the inner spaciousness. Sky has no form. Sky, we have a word for sky, but sky doesn't actually exist. There is no sky. There just seems to be a sky, because what you're seeing as the blue, if it's blue, is just the light against the background of space, the darkness of space behind it creates that illusion that there is something there. But if you travel upwards, you will never reach the sky. You may reach the clouds, and then you go to the clouds, and then there's more sky, and finally it's gone. Where was the sky? There is no sky. So it has no form, so he used the best word he could find was heaven or sky, the kingdom of heaven, the dimension of formlessness, which is within you, he said. And that's the most important thing you in your life, to find that. That's priority number one. And then, as you find that, then you love your neighbor as yourself, because you recognize the same formless essence in you is the same formless essence in the so-called other, and then you love your neighbor as yourself. But no matter how hard you try, you can't real empathy, real loving kindness, real benevolence, real goodwill towards another. It's not really, you cannot sustain for very long if there's only the personality level. You have a resemblance of that, but it's usually the ego playing a particular role. This mind-made sense of self is also much more focused on the negative than the positive. To be free, you awaken to who you are beyond your history and your life situation. apply the presence to every arising challenge in your life. And challenge, the greater part of challenges, well, a large part of challenges comes through other people. You might have noticed. People can cause lots of challenges because they're so difficult to deal with. It could come through your health situation, the body, and it could come through your work situation, but is related to your financial situation. Those are the challenges that have certain external causes. So you have, on the one hand, challenges that arise just through your mind, the unobserved mind, and then others, actual challenges in your external life. But the question is, what is the state of consciousness with which you meet the arising challenges in your life? And ultimately, what your entire life is not determined by what happens to you, but by how you respond to what happens. That is, your freedom, it's how you respond to any event that happens to you. And your response determines further events. The important thing is that you gradually begin to realize, oh, the sound is making a strange sound. You gradually begin to realize that what until recently you called my life is ultimately something relatively insubstantial. It's a story in your mind. And then that becomes less of a burden. The entire narrative of me and my life is then gradually, and that is part of the integration, is gradually no longer perceived as a burden, and you no longer derive your sense of who you are from the story of your life, the narrative. So who you are is the presence now, and that's timeless and it's unconditioned. And all that remains then is memories. Of course you remember your past, but you have now a completely different relationship with your past. And ultimately, what is that when we talk of your past? Thoughts in your head is your past. And what's your future? Thoughts in your head is the future. So both past and future are experienced and cannot be experienced in any other way as thoughts in your mind. The rest is just the immediate experience of this moment. And even whenever you label whatever you experience in this moment mentally by judging it this way or that, that's also the past that is coloring the way in which you're experiencing this moment. So you have a certain relationship to whatever is arising in this moment. and you call it this or call it that. But it doesn't, there's another way of experiencing this moment, and that is accepting it as it is without the compulsive need to label it. And that's an amazing liberation. And then you are living as the deep I more and more. And you no longer get the sense that something incredibly, that you are this huge ball of problems that needs to be solved. A bit like the Gordian knot that's in Greek, I believe in ancient Greek mythology. There was this, I don't think it was even mythology, I think it's an actual historical fact. There was the Gordian knot, K-N-O-T. There was this huge thing, a rope that was tied into a huge knot. I don't know how big it was. And the challenge was to disentangle this Gordian knot, and nobody could do it. They said, oh my God. And they said, whoever can disentangle it will conquer the world. That's the story. And then a young man came. His name was Alexander, I think. And he looked at it and he drew his sword and cut through it. And so he became Alexander the Great, who conquered the known world at the time. And so the Gordian knot, I'm using this story as an analogy for the egoic self. It means you have tied yourself into a Gordian knot, me and my problems. And then you attempt to disentangle one thing after another, but while you solve one problem here, another one pops up there, and then you go there, and then, okay, I've dealt with this now. That work problem is solved, the finances are working again, that's great. And then suddenly your spouse goes off with someone else. Or suddenly you have a pain here. To go. Life never leaves you alone for very long. But the main thing is that this entity that the Buddha calls the self, it doesn't take time to transcend it, because you would have to some extent, psychoanalysis tries to solve the problem of you. And although there is something to be said for occasionally looking at certain things in your past, but your main area, your main focus needs to remain the present moment, except ways when you might suddenly discover why it is that every time somebody makes you wait, you become extremely upset and angry, far beyond what would be warranted by this particular situation. And suddenly you may remember, as you become more conscious of your emotions, that perhaps when you were a child, who knows, your dad abandoned you and the family when you were very young, and this sense of abandonment comes over you even when you're waiting for somebody and somebody arrives late. You overreact totally because there's a heavy pain body associated with the idea of abandonment. And this has been unconscious, and suddenly as you bring more presence, you become more aware of that emotion that arises. Instead of being it, you're the awareness that sees the arising of the emotion. And then it sometimes happens that when you clearly see the arising of an emotion, you may suddenly also remember where it started. You may, or you may not. It could be helpful if you remember where it started. It's not an absolute necessity, because it could have started in another lifetime. So whatever it is, realize that the primary factor in any situation is your inner state. So there are quite a few people who are joining us from other parts of the planet. I don't know where they are, I think it's over there. Now all of you here, luckily, have escaped the polar vortex. Especially if you're from places like Chicago, you'll be very grateful to be here. However, if you are in Chicago or similar places, be grateful that you're experiencing a one in a lifetime weather phenomenon. But don't forget to dress up warm enough when you go out. Be grateful for whatever your experience of this moment is. And if you cannot be grateful, at least allow it to be, because it already is. You might as well. Now, if you did this little thing, it sounds very little, and it is very little, allowing your experience of this moment to be the way it is, just this little thing would remove, well, it's hard to put it in percentage terms, let's say 95% of the suffering from your life. I don't know about the rest, the 5%, we'll get to that sometime. That would already remove a gigantic chunk of unhappiness in whatever form. Unhappiness is the most generic term one could use. The Buddha called it suffering. And so for the next 6 months, then that obviously is one of the practices. Not to internally resist your experience of this moment. Now, of course, many times, possibly you'll forget that, and that's fine. The moment you realize that you forgot it, it's there again, and then you can accept your experience of this moment as the unhappiness that is arising in you because you forgot to accept your experience of this moment, and so you feel this unhappiness arising in you, and you say, where does that come from? Oh, I forgot to accept my experience of this moment. And then you accept the unhappiness, and the weird thing with unhappiness is when you completely accept the unhappiness, it cannot survive very long. It cannot actually coexist with acceptance. So the weird thing then arises that you say something like, okay, I'm unhappy, that's okay, I don't mind being unhappy. And then the unhappiness goes, what's going on? That's not supposed to happen. The unhappiness cannot survive for very long with the acceptance, even the acceptance of unhappiness, not indulging in unhappiness, but the acceptance. Now, the acceptance of unhappiness, it presupposes that there's an awareness there that knows that you're unhappy. Now, that might sound like something very natural, but it isn't, because the most unhappy people, and there are still millions, and of course they have reasons for being unhappy, yes. And it's not necessarily the people who you'd think would have the most powerful reasons for being unhappy. It's often those who you would think, well, there are many millions who have it worse than they, but these are more unhappy than those. It's often the case. So the unhappiness is something that when it's recognized as unhappiness and accepted, something happens to it. It begins to dissolve. But the really unhappy people are so identified with the unhappiness, which is a combination of certain recurring thoughts in your head, a certain narrative that is not pleasant, whether it is about my life, whether the narrative says, my life, oh, dreadful thing, my life, oh, why did it all go so wrong, wrong. And now that's it, it's nothing I can do, or whether the narrative is about somebody else. You know what he did, what she said and did, and the narrative may be about something that hasn't happened yet, and it goes on and on. Or something that happened in the distant past, or not so distant past. So there's a narrative, and then there are emotions that are a reflection of the narrative. The narrative is thoughts, certain types of thoughts, certain thoughts that have a certain frequency. And then that awakens the emotional frequency, because the body thinks the narrative in your mind is reality, that is the reality that you're experiencing. So the body reacts with an emotion. Simple example, at night you can't sleep because you're extremely worried about what's going to happen to you, or somebody close to you, or even the world. And it all sounds very critical. There's a crisis in your head. Not outside. Outside your head there's a pillow, and there's a blanket, or even something big and fluffy and soft, down, duvet, and there's no unhappiness there. And if you look around the bedroom also, where's the unhappiness? The plant is okay, it's not unhappy. No, it's all happening in here. And then the body says that is the critical reality that you inhabit. There is a crisis in your life. The body doesn't know the difference between what's actually happening and what's happening in your head. What's happening in your head is taken to be the absolute reality. And then you experience the emotion that goes with that kind of narrative. And so there's no awareness. And when you're trapped in that, you don't even really know that you are unhappy, because you are the unhappiness. The unhappiness has become your identity. So when you become the unhappiness, you don't even know that let's use the Buddhist term suffering. When you are in this deep suffering, you don't even know you're suffering, because the suffering is a gigantic, huge chunk, part of your sense of self. You are a suffering entity. And as all therapists know, that once the patient or the client, or whatever they call the people that come to them according to their school, they reach a point where there's a possibility of going beyond the deep-seated patterns, unconscious patterns, and then there's a huge resistance very often. because the person is afraid of losing a very important piece of their identity, and sometimes it's the most important part of their identity. If they have lived with an unhappy sense of self for years and perhaps even decades, they don't want to let go. And again, they don't know that consciously. They never say, I do not want to let go. But if they could say that, then that means there's already some awareness. So lack of awareness, lack of presence, that is the unawakened state that still, unfortunately, millions of humans are trapped in that. But the moment you know, you recognize your inner state, that means there is an awareness, which there is another dimension of consciousness that has emerged in you, through you. A deeper dimension of consciousness that is not the conditioned thinking. So we can call it awareness, we can call it presence, we can call it the unconditioned consciousness. And then the beginning of freedom, or the possibility of freedom arises. And it's from there that you recognize your inner states as they arise. From there that you recognize your unhappiness. You can say, oh, you can feel the unhappiness. But the moment you become aware of suffering or unhappiness in you, you're no longer feeding it with your thoughts. As long as you're not aware, you're feeding it as a vicious circle, you're feeding it with your thoughts, with your narrative, and you're trapped in the vicious circle. Your narrative creates more unhappiness, the unhappiness creates more thought, and you're trapped in that. So for the next 6 months, and hopefully beyond, because it's a much more pleasant way to live, you make it your practice to be aware of your inner states, and meaning no matter what situation arises in your life, whether it's little things, big things, difficult situations, difficult people, challenges, problems, because the next 6 months are not going to be free of challenges and problems. So whatever it is, realize that the primary factor in any situation is your inner state, because that determines how you respond. So no matter what it is, your primary responsibility is to be aware of what goes on inside you. And that means whatever arises in your life is actually to be used in your practice, so that you do not become dependent on what's going on externally in your life. So your inner state gradually is no longer determined, perhaps still a little bit, yes, but not completely determined by outer events, people, situations, and so on. Inner freedom arises. That's awakening. So there is a disidentification from the movement of thought and the fluctuating emotions. There's a stepping back. You're not repressing anything, you're allowing it. But you can only allow it because there's an awareness. And that awareness is you, ultimately. That is what I sometimes call the deep I, as opposed to the surface I. The I meaning not this I, but that I is interesting too. It's an analogy for consciousness, the I of awareness. But now I'm talking about the pronoun I first. There's the surface I, which is the conditioned person, the entity that you are for a while, and there is the deep I, which is the consciousness. My usual analogy, which probably you've heard me mention quite a few times, the ocean the surface of the ocean, the wave or the ripple is the surface I, and the ocean, the depth of the ocean, is the deep I. And an awakening human is a ripple on the surface of the ocean that until recently had been completely identified with its ripple existence on the horizontal dimension of the surface of the ocean, looking at every other ripple as another ripple, not me, it's another. And always you have to be very careful with the others. And the ego actually likes the others to be as other as possible. And then the little ripple begins to realize that there's a depth. The moment it stops thinking about its ripple existence, and that there's a thinking subsides and something else remains, something else that is very deep, has no form, is just a presence, if we can even call it anything, a presence.